Ma'am, step away from the patient.
I'm in the middle of a stroke emergency. You need to leave.
Your English is too good for this job. Where'd you really come from?
I was born in this hospital. I'm the emergency department director.
Then you'll have no problem proving it. Downtown. Turn around.
42 minutes. That's how long federal agents detained Dr. Keisha Williams while her stroke patient's brain was dying. This wasn't mistaken identity. This was something far worse. By the time they realized their mistake, one man would never walk again. Two agents would lose their careers, and a jury would award $11.4 million. But the real cost, you can't put a price on that. Before we go further, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, stories like this don't get told unless people like you make sure they're heard. Hit subscribe because what happened in Atlanta could happen in your town. September 18th, 2024, 3:47 p.m. Wednesday afternoon. Grady Memorial Hospital's emergency department was running at its usual controlled chaos. Level 1 trauma center, downtown Atlanta. The kind of place where every second counts and everyone knows their role. Dr. Keisha Williams had been part of that rhythm for 19 years. Started as a registered nurse right out of school, worked her way up through the ranks. Trauma nurse, charge nurse, clinical coordinator, now emergency department director, the person who ran the entire operation. She was 42 years old, born on the 4th floor of this same building back in 1982, in the maternity ward that's now administrative offices. She'd literally never lived anywhere but Atlanta, her entire life within a 20-mile radius of where she stood right now. During COVID, she'd led the ER response team, kept the department running when half the staff was sick and the morgue was overflowing, saved over 200 critical patients when the protocols were changing daily and nobody knew what would work. The hospital had given her an award for it. Georgia named her Nurse of the Year in 2019. Today was supposed to be routine. Then the stroke patient arrived, 72-year-old male, left side weakness, slurred speech, classic presentation. His wife had called 911 the moment she noticed smart woman probably saved his life by acting fast. They were 37 minutes into the golden hour. That narrow window where clot-busting drugs can still work, where brain tissue can still be saved. Williams was directing her team with the precision that came from doing this 1,000 times. Get neurology on the phone. I want a SANT in the next 8 minutes. Start the TPA protocol, but wait for my order. 2 residents moved immediately. 3 nurses already had lines and vitals monitoring medications prepped. This was a well-oiled machine. 6 security cameras mounted throughout the ER captured every angle. Standard for a major hospital, documentation, liability protection, quality control. The cameras had recorded thousands of emergencies. This was just another Wednesday, until it wasn't. The 2 ICE agents walked past the main security desk without much notice. Federal badges, official business. Security waved them through. Happens sometimes they're looking for someone checking on a detainee who came in with injuries following up on a case. Agent Derek Garrett was 34, 6 years with ICE assigned to the Atlanta field office. His partner, Agent Melissa Torres, was 29, 18 months in the field, still relatively new. Garrett spotted Dr. Williams through the glass of Trauma Bay 3. Black woman, scrubs, giving orders. He leaned toward Torres, not quite whispering, not quite speaking, full voice. See, told you hospitals are full of them. His body camera was recording, so was hers. Red lights blinking on their tactical vests. Standard procedure. Everything gets documented. Torres shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Garrett walked into the trauma bay, straight up to Williams while she was adjusting an IV drip, eyes on 3 different monitors showing the patient's vitals. Ma'am, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I need to see identification and proof of legal work authorization. Williams looked up confused. Then she saw the vests, the badges, ICE. She pointed to the ID badge clipped to her scrubs. Grady Memorial Hospital. Keisha Williams, MD, Emergency Director. Her photo, her credentials, right there in plain view. Garrett barely glanced at it. That doesn't prove citizenship. Could be fake. I need a passport, birth certificate, naturalization papers. Williams blinked. Her team had stopped working, staring at this exchange. I'm the emergency department director. I was born in this hospital. My office is right down that hallway. Garrett's expression didn't change. Ma'am, everyone has a story. The golden hour was ticking. And something very wrong was about to get much worse. Dr. Marcus Chen heard the commotion from the nurses' station. Chief of Emergency Medicine, Williams' direct supervisor, 28 years at Grady. He'd hired her herself back when she was fresh out of nursing school. He walked into Trauma Bay 3 and immediately understood the problem. Agent Dr. Williams was born in this hospital. I have her complete personnel file in my office, birth certificate on record, 19 years of continuous employment. If you need verification, I can provide it right now. Garrett turned to face him. Sir, I need you to step back. You're interfering with a federal investigation. Investigation of what exactly? That's not your concern. Step back or you'll be charged with obstruction of justice. Chen's face hardened. He'd been a doctor long enough to know when someone was abusing authority. He pulled out his phone and started recording. I'm documenting this interaction. You're in a hospital emergency department during an active medical emergency. Dr. Williams is treating a critical stroke patient. Sir, final warning. The confrontation was drawing attention. Staff members clustered in the hallway. Patients' family members peered through the glass walls. Phones came out, more cameras, more witnesses. Raymond Brooks arrived next, hospital security chief. Before this job, he'd spent 22 years with Atlanta PD, retired as a sergeant. He knew law enforcement procedure inside and out. Gents, his voice carried authority, I need to see your warrant. Garrett's jaw tightened. We don't need a warrant for a workplace enforcement action. Actually, you do. Hospitals are designated sensitive locations under ICE's own policy guidelines. You cannot conduct enforcement actions here without either a warrant or an imminent threat to national security. Which is it? We have intelligence that this individual is working illegally. Show me your warrant. We don't need, then you need to leave. Now. The standoff was building. Federal authority versus institutional policy. Two men who knew the law interpreting it differently, neither willing to back down. That's when the stroke patient's daughter stepped forward. Her name was Patricia Henderson. She was an attorney. Corporate law, not criminal, but she knew enough to recognize when something was wrong. She held up her phone recording. I'm documenting this for legal purposes. My father is having a stroke. This doctor was treating him. You're interfering with emergency medical care. Garrett's body camera caught what he said next. He thought he was speaking quietly to Torres, but the microphone picked it up clearly. The audio would be enhanced later, played in a federal courtroom, dissected by attorneys, and replayed on national news. Dominican nurses never have proper papers. Hospitals are easy pickings. They can't run. Torres winced. She knew that was going to be a problem. But she was a junior agent, 18 months in the field. You don't question your senior partner in the middle of an operation. 3 nurses heard it. 2 residents heard it. Patricia Henderson heard it, and her expression changed from concerned to furious. Williams stood there still in her scrub stethoscope around her neck, trying to process what was happening. She'd been handling a medical emergency. Now federal agents were demanding proof she had a right to exist in the building where she'd been born. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back. You're arresting me, detaining you for verification of legal status. I've told you I was born here. I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm this hospital's emergency director. Garrett pulled out handcuffs. Turn around. Williams looked at Dr. Chen, at Raymond Brooks, at her nursing staff, at the patient monitors still beeping behind her. The stroke patient's golden hour was slipping away. Continue the protocol, she told her team, her voice remarkably steady. Get him to CT. Don't wait for me. Then she turned around. The handcuffs clicked shut in front of 6 hospital security cameras, 2 ICE body cameras, and 8 civilian cell phones. 12 different angles capturing the moment of a hospital director was arrested in her own emergency department. Staff members stood frozen. One nurse started crying. The residents looked at each other, uncertain whether to follow Williams' orders or intervene somehow. Garrett walked her toward the exit. Through the ER, past the nurses' station, past the waiting room where families sat with sick children and elderly parents. Everyone watching, everyone recording. The timestamp on the hospital security footage read 16:22:55. 51 minutes had elapsed since the stroke patient arrived. The golden hour had expired. The window for optimal treatment had closed while federal agents detained the doctor who was trying to save his life. You just watched federal agents handcuff a hospital director in the middle of a medical emergency. No warrant, no probable cause. In the building where she was born 42 years ago. Was this law enforcement or was this something else entirely? Comment below because this question matters. Hospital parking lot, 4:18 p.m. Dr. Williams sat in the back of the ICE vehicle, handcuffed, still wearing her scrubs. The cage separated her from the front seats. She'd sat in spaces like this before, but on ride-alongs with police, observing how paramedics and officers work together. Never as the person being detained. A black Mercedes pulled up fast. Dr. Patricia Monroe, hospital CEO, 30 years at Grady. She'd started as a resident in internal medicine back when the hospital was still segregated by custom, if not by law. She walked up to Garrett's window carrying a folder. Agent Garrett, I'm Dr. Patricia Monroe, CEO of this hospital. I have Dr. Williams' personnel file, including her birth certificate from our records. August 14th, 1982. Born in this building, 4th floor maternity ward. Do you want to see it? Garrett took the folder, looked at the birth certificate. Cook County Hospital, signed by the delivering physician. Official seal, State of Georgia. He handed it back. We'll verify this information downtown. She'll be processed through proper channels. You'll verify it now or I'm calling Federal Judge Amanda Warren. She's on our hospital board. I have her personal number. Ma'am, you're welcome to call whoever you'd like. We're taking her in for processing. Monroe's expression was somewhere between fury and disbelief. You're looking at her birth certificate. From this hospital's own records. What exactly do you need to verify? Garrett started the engine. Inside the vehicle, Torres sat in the passenger seat. Her body camera captured her face in the rearview mirror. You could see it the moment she realized this was wrong. The moment she knew they'd crossed a line, but she was 18 months into her career. Her training officer was giving orders. She said nothing. They pulled out of the parking lot. Back in the ER, the stroke patient was being rushed to CT, but the damage was done. 51 minutes since arrival. The clot-busting drugs work best in the first 60 minutes. After that, effectiveness drops dramatically. Every minute past the golden hour, more brain tissue dies. The CT showed massive ischemic stroke. Left hemisphere. The damage was permanent now. James Peterson, that was his name, the man on the gurney would spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Left side paralyzed. Could have been prevented, would have been prevented if Dr. Williams had been allowed to finish what she started. Williams's daughters found out the next day at school. Maya was 14, Jordan was 10. A classmate showed them the video on TikTok. Their mother, in handcuffs, being walked through a hospital. Millions of views already. Is that your mom? They called their grandfather, William's father, 71 years old, retired battalion chief from Atlanta Fire Department. He'd spent 32 years running into burning buildings. Heart attack survivor. Took medications to keep his rhythm steady. He saw the video, saw his daughter in handcuffs, felt his chest tighten, called 911, spent 4 days in the cardiac unit, stress-induced arrhythmia. The doctors said it was the emotional shock. Seeing your child treated like a criminal when you know she spent her life saving people, it does something to the body. 3 generations harmed by 42 minutes. What came back was damning. March 2024. Text message to a colleague. Focus on hospitals, easy pickings. They can't run, and half of them are probably illegal anyway. April 2024, email to his supervisor. Dominican and Haitian nurses never have proper papers. We should target healthcare facilities in immigrant neighborhoods. It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. 4 prior complaints in his personnel file, 2 from 2021, 1 from 2022, 1 from 2023, all involving Black or Latino professionals, all claiming racial profiling, and all resulting in written warnings that apparently meant nothing. A Black pharmacist in 2019, born in Alabama, detained for 2 hours. A Haitian social worker in 2021, U.S. citizen for 15 years, arrested at her office. A Dominican business owner in 2023, Army veteran, Purple Heart recipient, handcuffed in front of his employees. Pattern, not accident, pattern, and his supervisors knew. The complaints were in his file. The warnings were documented. Nobody stopped him. The fallout was immediate. 43 immigrant nurses, legal residents, documented workers stopped coming to work. Not a strike, just fear. 90 minutes after they took her from the hospital, Dr. Williams was released. Not because ICE suddenly believed her, because hospital CEO Patricia Monroe made good on her threat, called federal judge Amanda Warren, explained the situation. The judge made a phone call. 45 minutes later, Williams was cut loose. No apology, no explanation, just "you're free to go," and her belongings handed back in a plastic bag. But the damage was already done. Grady Memorial Hospital had a policy. Any employee arrested for any reason must be suspended pending a full investigation. Didn't matter that the arrest was bogus. Didn't matter that she'd been released immediately. Policy was policy. 6 weeks. Unpaid. The woman who'd run their emergency department for 4 years, who'd saved 200 COVID patients, who'd been born in that building, sent home while they investigated. That's institutional betrayal. When the organization you've bled for treats you like a liability the moment things get complicated. Then came the lawsuit. James Peterson's family, the stroke patient, sued Grady Memorial for $2.3 million. Delayed treatment, medical negligence, permanent disability that could have been prevented. And here's where it gets worse. The hospital's initial legal response blamed Dr. Williams, said she abandoned her patient during a critical emergency, said she failed to maintain appropriate medical protocols. Never mind that she'd been handcuffed by federal agents. Never mind that she'd told her team to continue treatment. Never mind that she'd done everything possible under impossible circumstances. The hospital threw her under the bus to protect itself. Williams couldn't sleep, started having panic attacks. Every time she saw a uniformed police security, even hospital security, she'd worked with for years, her heart rate spiked. Sweating, tunnel vision, couldn't breathe, post-traumatic stress disorder. Diagnosed by the same hospital psychiatrist who'd helped her process the trauma of losing patients during COVID. She tried going back to work after the suspension ended, made it 3 shifts, couldn't do it, couldn't put on scrubs without feeling like she was back in that moment. Handcuffed, humiliated, powerless. 4 months. That's how long before she could wear her scrubs again without having a panic attack. Journalists found the pattern. 4 prior complaints. All Black or Latino professionals. All American citizens. Pharmacist. Social worker. Veteran. The system knew. The system did nothing. Garrett's report, subject became combative and refused to comply. Body camera footage showed Ortiz calmly asking to see a warrant while his hands were raised. No combativeness, no refusal, just a veteran asking for basic constitutional rights. All 3 had filed complaints. All 3 complaints went into Garrett's personnel file. All 3 resulted in written warnings from his supervisor. Nobody stopped him, nobody transferred him, nobody put him on desk duty. The warnings went in the file and he kept working the field. The system knew. The system did nothing. Williams filed her lawsuit 14 months after the arrest. Federal civil rights violation, false imprisonment, racial profiling. The evidence was overwhelming. 11 camera angles, hospital security, ICE body cameras, civilian phones, everything synchronized. No gaps. The jury heard Garrett's voice. Hospitals are full of them. Then Dominican nurses never have proper papers. Easy pickings. They watched Dr. Williams handcuffed in her scrubs, walking through the ER she'd built. The timestamp ticking past the golden hour. They watched James Peterson's CT scan. A neurologist pointed to each dark area. Dead brain tissue. Permanent damage. Could have been prevented 42 minutes earlier. The defense argued Garrett was following protocol. How was he supposed to know the hospital ID was real? But the prosecution had text messages. March 2024, focus on hospitals, easy pickings. April 2024, Dominican and Haitian nurses never have proper papers. 4 prior complaints in his file. All ignored. Pattern, not accident. Pattern. The jury deliberated for 6 days. The foreman stood, 73-year-old retired construction worker. White man, Georgia native. On all counts, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Dr. Keisha Williams. Think about what you just heard. Agent Garrett targeted healthcare workers for months. Pharmacist, social worker, veteran, doctor, all Black or Latino, all American citizens, all professionals with credentials and documentation. His supervisors saw the complaints, read the warnings, did nothing. One man is permanently paralyzed, confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life because treatment was delayed by agents who refused to believe a birth certificate from their own hands. Dr. Williams has PTSD, can't wear the scrubs she worked 19 years to earn without her body remembering what it felt like to be handcuffed in front of her staff. Is what comes next enough? Is any amount of money enough for that? Comment your verdict. Because justice isn't just about the dollar amount. It's about what we're willing to call unacceptable. It's about where we draw the line. The jury foreman stood, 73-year-old retired construction worker, white man, Georgia native. He'd been taking notes every single day of the trial. On all counts, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Dr. Keisha Williams. The courtroom was silent. Compensatory damages, $2,900,000. That covered the measurable costs. Therapy for Williams and her daughters, $16,800 over 2 years. Her father's hospitalization, $28,000. Lost wages from 6 weeks suspension and 4 months of reduced capacity, $117,000. Legal fees, $68,000. The rest, $2.6 million, was for pain and suffering, for being handcuffed in front of her staff, for PTSD that made her afraid of her own workplace, for the weight of James Peterson's paralysis that she carried even though it wasn't her fault. Punitive damages, $10,500,000. That was the punishment. For the pattern of abuse, for the easy pickings, comment caught on camera, for violating the hospital-sensitive location policy that Garrett knew existed, for supervisors who saw complaints and did nothing. Total $13.4 million. But the judge made an adjustment. The hospital bore partial liability for suspending Williams and initially blaming her in the Peterson lawsuit. That reduced the federal government's share. Final amount, $11,400,000. Williams put her face in her hands and cried. Not relief, just exhaustion. Her attorney put an arm around her. The press asked for a statement outside the courthouse. This was never about money. Williams said, her voice steady despite the tears. This was about a man who will never walk again. This was about making sure it doesn't happen to someone else. I tell you, Agent Derek Garrett was terminated. No pension. Barred from future federal employment. His career in law enforcement was over. Agent Melissa Torres was terminated. She'd known it was wrong, followed orders anyway. That wasn't a defense, that was a choice. The supervisor who had ignored 4 complaints was demoted, reassigned to administrative duties, still employed, still collecting a paycheck. But here's the thing, no criminal charges, not one. This was a civil case. Money changed hands, careers ended, but nobody went to jail. Nobody faced criminal prosecution for what happened in that emergency room. Garrett walked out of that courthouse a free man. So did Torres. So did the supervisor. Dr. Williams still has nightmares. Still checks over her shoulder when someone in a uniform enters her ER. Still feels her heart rate spike when she sees an ACE vehicle on the street. James Peterson still can't walk. Still needs help getting dressed. Still can't pick up his grandchildren. The jury said $11.4 million. The system said that's what this was worth. But some things don't have a price tag. Some damage doesn't get undone by a verdict. Justice happened. But it wasn't complete. It never is. 6 weeks after the verdict, ICE announced revised training protocols for sensitive locations. Hospitals, schools, churches, places where enforcement actions required heightened scrutiny and supervisor approval. But here's the problem. That policy already existed, had existed for years. It was in the manual. It was in the training. Garrett knew about it. His supervisors knew about it. They just didn't follow it. This wasn't a policy failure. It was a compliance failure. And a memo reminding people of rules they already ignored wasn't going to change anything fundamental. 40 healthcare workers in Atlanta filed a class action lawsuit using Williams' case as precedent. Nurses, technicians, janitors, all with similar stories. Stopped at work, stopped at BAM, questioned, detained, all American citizens or legal residents, all targeted because of how they looked or how their names sounded. 12 cities opened investigations into ICE hospital enforcement actions between 2022 and 2024. Los Angeles, New York, Houston, Phoenix, Miami. The pattern wasn't isolated to Atlanta, it was nationwide. Estimated 200 healthcare workers targeted over 3 years. Some detained for hours. Some arrested, all traumatized. Most never filed complaints because they were afraid. Afraid of losing their shows. Afraid of retaliation. Afraid nobody would believe them. Williams' case gave them proof that someone would listen. James Peterson. That's the name that gets lost sometimes in stories about lawsuits and policy changes. The stroke patient, the man whose life was permanently altered by 51 minutes. He was 72 years old, retired postal worker, delivered mail for 34 years in the same Atlanta neighborhood, knew everyone on his route, remembered their kids' names, brought dog treats for the pets, married to his wife Linda for 48 years, 3 children, 6 grandchildren, active grandfather, used to take the grandkids to the park every Sunday, push them on swings, taught them to ride bikes. The left side of his body is paralyzed now. Left arm, left leg, facial droop. He's in a wheelchair, needs help getting dressed, needs help bathing, needs help with everything. 51 minutes. That's what was stolen from him. Not by a disease, not by bad luck. By federal agents who decided that detaining a doctor was more important than letting her save a life. His family settled with Grady Memorial for $2.3 million. The hospital never admitted fault, just paid to make it go away. Dr. Williams visits James Peterson once a month. Has since she returned to work. She brings flowers, sits with him, talks about the weather, about his grandkids, about nothing important. He tells her every time, not your fault, doc. She doesn't believe him, can't believe him. She knows intellectually that she did everything possible. But knowing something and feeling something are different things. Survivor's guilt doesn't respond to logic. Williams returned after 8 months, still emergency director. She used the settlement to establish a legal defense fund for immigrant healthcare workers. Her daughter's recovered. Her father's heart is stable. But watch her when someone in uniform walks into the ER. Her shoulders tense. Trauma doesn't disappear. Williams herself is functional, professional, competent, does her job at the same high level she always has. But watch her when someone in a uniform walks into the ER. Her shoulders tense. Her eyes track them. Her hand moves unconsciously to her ID badge, making sure it's visible. Trauma doesn't just disappear because you win a lawsuit. It lives in your body, changes how you move through the world, makes you check over your shoulder in places that used to feel safe. She got justice, but she didn't get healed. Those are 2 different things. Williams got justice, but justice for one person doesn't fix a broken system, unless it creates a blueprint for others to follow. 3 months later, Temple University Hospital, North Philadelphia, Marie St. Jean, Haitian nurse, legal permanent resident, 10 years in the U.S., certified trauma nurse working the night shift. 2 IC agents walked into her unit. Same approach, same demands. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We need to see proof of work authorization. Marie's hands started shaking. She'd seen the Williams video, but her charge nurse had also seen it. Do you have a warrant? The agents hesitated. Under ICE sensitive location policy, you cannot conduct enforcement here without a warrant. Grady Memorial Hospital versus Williams. $11.4 million precedent. You need to leave. The head nurse was recording. 4 staff members had phones out. Everyone had learned from Atlanta. The agents looked at each other, looked at the cameras, looked at the staff standing together. They left. The video went viral within hours. They tried it again and we stopped them. Marie St. Jean kept her job, kept her dignity, didn't spend 42 minutes in handcuffs, because Keisha Williams had. In America, you can work 19 years, save 200 COVID patients, become emergency director, and still get handcuffed because your English was too good. Keisha Williams got justice, $11.4 million. But how many didn't? How many are still scared to go to work? Why did it take a man's paralysis and $11.4 million to enforce a policy that already existed? Healthcare workers save lives. They shouldn't have to prove citizenship while doing it. Williams's case created precedent. Philadelphia proved it works, but only if people know about it. Next week, Marie St. John's full story, how hospitals organized, how one verdict in Atlanta changed protocols nationwide. These stories don't stop unless we stop telling them. If you think one case shouldn't need paralysis and millions to change policy, share this.